Teachers' Voices.
As vozes do professor.
أصوات المعلمون.
La voix des enseignants.
Bien. Professores. Teachers' Voices.
Welcome to a new episode of Teachers' Voices. In this episode, I, your host, educational researcher Nina Alonso, together with expert Evelyn Arizpe, and three great educators from different contexts, will talk about the power of storytelling. We will hear fascinating stories from educators with a passion for books and storytelling. We'll hear from Susan, who works at a library in an international school in Hong Kong, Lina, who specializes in teaching language and literature in Athens, and Trini, a head teacher at a school with limited resources in Santiago. But first, let's welcome our special guest, Evelyn Arizpe. Evelyn has worked in the field of children's literature and literacy for more than 25 years. She pioneered research into children's responses to picture books and visual literacy, and in the last decade, her research has focused on migration and displacement, building on this to develop a program for migrant readers. She has worked with both young adult texts and picture books in her research, with participants of different ages and across different countries. Hello, Evelyn. Thanks so much for being here today.
Hello, Nina. Buenas tardes. Thank you for this invitation.
As an expert in literature for young people, I would like to start by asking you, why is literature and storytelling so important for children and adolescents?
Nina, that is a huge question. I think the short answer is referring to Jerome Bruner's, the American psychologist's, quote, that is that we are storytelling creatures. We tell stories all the time to ourselves and to others to pass on knowledge and culture, to entertain, to make other people laugh or cry. And of course, children and adolescents are forming their identity. They are creating their identity as part of a community. So they can do this through listening to stories and through telling stories themselves.
What is the role of visual images in literature and storytelling?
The visual image comes into storytelling not only in picture books, but also in drama and other types of performance. But I think in picture book, it plays a particularly important part because it works not by itself, but together with the words. And that's why the potential of the storytelling to have a double impact is there. Children are surrounded by images today. They are used to making meaning from everything that they see around them. And one of the important things to do is for them to look at images carefully in order to really be able to construct meaning from both the words and the pictures and the way in which they interact or transact with each other. So they make meaning from the narrative elements, of course, but also from all those aesthetic elements that make up an image. And also, importantly, they bring in their own experiences to make sense of those visual images.
With Evelyn's ideas in mind, we are first going to visit Susan, who works in a library at an international primary school in Hong Kong. At the time of our chat, Susan was combining online reading activities with going to the library's physical space. She describes for me a friendly, lovely space in which children can sit on the floor and access a variety of books that are constantly being updated to attract the children's interest. Hi, Susan. How are you?
Very well, thanks.
Susan works in the library of an international primary school in Hong Kong, and I asked her to paint a picture of the context she works in.
So we have 30 classes in total, over 900 students, and every class comes into the library every week. So it's a really, really popular location in our school. I think I could probably say it's most children's favourite place to be in our school. So we are really lucky because we have kids that are so eager to come in here and see the books.
Susan is responsible for selecting books for the children who come into the library. When I asked our expert Evelyn about what made a good picture book reading experience, she first mentioned a relevant aspect that is reflected in Susan's story.
Selecting books is very important. You want to select books that are engaging, that are fun, but also books that are challenging, and of course books that are beautiful.
So I make the selection. I actually read every picture book that I buy. So I'm really familiar with the stories that we have. So I can work with the teachers then, and I know which books I can recommend to them for teaching certain topics, or which books I can use in the library to work with the children. I get lots of children in every class that come to me asking for recommendations. So I work really closely with them, understanding what they like, and just to keep them really excited about reading. So I always make sure when we get our new books, I'm always thinking about who would be interested in reading that. And I make sure I highlight our new books with those students just to keep their appetite for reading satisfied. I know them very well. So our class size is 30, but actually when the children come into the library, because I'm just so excited about reading and getting them engaged in reading, as I said, I'll often say to specific children that come in, I've got a book that I think you'll be interested in.
The other thing we need to talk about is about the time and the space that a good teacher, educator, or mediator provides for the readers to really have the full experience of a picture book.
I do make sure that that is the first priority when children are here in the library, to be mingling with them on the library floor, talking to them about what they're looking at, about what they've read, what they love reading, and sitting down and just reading a short story with them one-on-one, which doesn't always end up being one-on-one because we end up with a bit of a crowd around us. They all want to come and sit and listen. And it's just so wonderful to see the appreciation and enthusiasm in these little people. They really are lovely.
I asked Susan to share a recent experience that was enjoyable for both her and her students.
I had an experience just about a week ago. So at the moment, I'm reading stories to the children from a Hong Kong award that we support. It's called the Golden Dragon Book Award. It's actually Children's Choice Award in Hong Kong. When the shortlist comes out, I always read the stories to the children, and then they have the chance to vote on which book they think is their favourite. So I had a Zoom lesson about a week ago with the class, and we managed to read 2 of the stories. And at the time I was reading them, I wasn't sure how engaged the children were. It's a little bit difficult on Zoom to have that personal touch. I wasn't sure whether the books were a good fit for these children. The next lesson I had with this class was face-to-face in our library. And I was very touched. One of the students had said she chose one of those books to write her book report. And the book is by Linda Bailey. It's called Mary, Who Wrote Frankenstein. So the book was a little bit challenging in some ways. It's written in a picture book style, but it's the story of Mary Shelley and how she came to write that story. But the children were quite engaged when we were talking about it in that second lesson. And as I said, this girl said she wrote a book report on it and actually went and found out more about the story of Frankenstein and Mary Shelley and spent time doing some extra research. And I just felt that was such a win-win situation because, well, clearly they were entertained by the story, but her curiosity was piqued for her to go and find out more. And I love those moments. She was very excited to share it in class, and you could see that. She was just so excited to tell everybody. And I could see also that other children kind of stopped and were a little bit inspired by what she had done as well. there are these moments when I read these stories to the children, where these stories stick with them in some way, even if it's subconsciously, and, rise again at another time, and they're able to make that connection of, oh, I heard that story when I was back in primary school, and now I see the connections. And so I love that picture books can do that. They can make us curious to find out more. And I was thrilled in this situation, actually, that this girl had gone ahead and done that.
Susan loves reading and has a passion for picture books that is shared by all interviewees in this episode. She explained why.
I personally have a great passion of reading, and I love to share that and encourage that in children as well. And I think particularly at the moment, reading is such a wonderful outlet. And I think in times like this, children like to identify themselves in books, and picture books are a way also of helping children to identify feelings that maybe they can't put into words themselves, they can't describe. So I find picture books are just a lovely way to start conversations with children. And children love to share and have the opportunity to have a voice as well. So I love when I'm reading to them to give them the opportunity to talk about how they're feeling while we read the story. How can they empathise with the character? And I think these are really important thoughts or feelings for children to have as they develop.
We are now going to Greece to meet Lina Jordanaki. Lina loves picture books, and her experience with children and wordless books goes hand in hand with some important issues explained by Evelyn earlier in this episode about how to best support children's reading of picture books. As is often the case when recording this podcast, generous busy teachers prefer to talk during weekends, and so I found Lina in Athens on a Sunday afternoon, drinking an iced coffee on a terrace surrounded by a heap of beautiful wordless picture books.
Hello Nina, how are you? Thank you for the invitation.
Since Lina specializes in teaching language and literature, I asked why reading is so important for her and her students.
As a passionate reader myself, I really enjoy encouraging my students to explore the world of literature, and I'm always keen to introduce them to a variety of books and genres. I'm a big fan of picture books, and more specifically, wordless picture books. And these are books which tell their stories only with the help of pictures, no words or almost no words. And in terms of the children's perspective, there are many reasons why the engagement with wordless picture books can be very helpful.
Lina told me about her interesting experiences working with older children and picture books.
I wanted to work with 11-year-old students in the last grade of primary school because there is limited research on how older children respond to wordless picture books. These books are usually targeted at very young children who are not fluent readers. When I started working with 11-year-old children and wordless picture books, I saw their enthusiasm because they didn't expect that there are books with no words at all, and they suddenly had to engage with literature and with stories in a very different way from the usual. I can give you a story about how children discuss gender, because how characters are depicted in pictures and how children translate the characters' gender is quite interesting when it comes to wordless picture books. So while discussing the wordless book Journey by Aaron Becker, my students struggled to decide whether the heroes are male or female figures. If you see the book, it's not very clear. The characters are painted with neutral colors. Their clothes are also neutral, so you cannot really tell. So most of the students argued that the protagonist is a girl because of the long hair. But there was a student who disagreed. She said that there is a boy in their school that has long hair as well. And this counter argument confused her classmates even more. It is quite interesting how she tried to give her own opinion and to justify that, look, you cannot say that this person is a girl just because of the hair. But then another student, trying to respond to that comment, said that it's not only the length of the hair, but also the hairstyle. So the protagonist has a fringe, and therefore she's a girl. And interestingly, this was convincing enough. So hairstyle and length of hair can tell you whether the protagonist is a boy or a girl, according to the students. It's also interesting that the first reaction of the children is to refer to simplistic stereotypes, which can be easily questioned by real life examples. And they did it themselves. Initially they started talking about the hair and about the shoulder bag, that these are for women, but there were counter arguments and there was room for reflection. So using wordless picture books as the starting point, teachers can promote their students' critical thinking and initiate this kind of thought-provoking conversations.
What Evelyn told me about how young people construct meaning from visual images in picture books resonates with Lina's experiences.
Looking at the picture books carefully, looking at them closely, helping them to ask open questions, creating a safe space really so that they can express their ideas and their emotions. So guiding but not dictating.
I was fascinated by their collaboration and their comments. Sometimes they were noticing details I had not seen at all, although I had already read those books. For example, in the French version of Little Red Riding Hood, there was a page where Little Red Riding Hood was walking around the forest, and in the background, if you looked at the page very carefully, you could see that some of the trees were cut. But I couldn't see it because the forest was full of grown trees. So I couldn't see that a few of them were cut. But the children noticed this and they said, oh, this means that the woodcutter is around. I think the most rewarding outcome as an educator is listening to their views, to children's views, and giving them space to express their ideas and making their voices heard. Because wordless picture books can tell many stories and there is no one right answer. So I didn't feel like I was the authoritative voice of the classroom. I was one of the readers. And whatever you say when it comes to discuss a wordless picture book, as long as you can justify it, of course, as long as it is something shown in the picture or as long as you can give some arguments, can be right. Nobody can tell you that your answer is wrong. As long as you look at the pictures and you are creative. And this boosts the confidence of the students, the confidence of the readers. At some point, a student told me, Miss, why don't we do this more often? We always read texts. We do not observe the pictures, or we look at the pictures and then we are asked to write the words that describe them. But talking about them with our classmates is more fun, and you see the pictures in many different ways.
The main thing is that the readers feel comfortable, both during the reading and in talking about the picture book. And also, a good experience includes allowing them to respond in different ways. It might be that some of them want to draw instead of talk, or some of them want to create a performance.
We now travel to the Andes. Trinidad, welcomes us during playtime in her primary state school in Santiago, where she is a teacher. It is a school with very limited resources, and so Trini does not have access to many materials, but she moves heaven and earth to provide books to read and talk about with her students.
Hey!
Hello, Trini. Thanks for accepting my invitation.
Thank you so much, Nina. I'm very excited.
Trini told me about the school and the children she works with.
This place that I work in is a challenge because most of my children are struggling with a lot of things that are beyond schoolwork. And so I've had to battle with that as well as motivating them to learn and to study. The experience that I've had with my students is that unfortunately they've had little experience or little exposure to books and to the love of reading. Until recently, most of them don't own books like literature because books are very expensive in Chile.
Trini has a passion for storytelling and explains why it is so central in her work as a teacher.
I believe reading is a tool for change. I've had the privilege as a daughter of a mother that is an avid reader. I've had the experience of having that shared moment with my mother in which she read to me as a child and the effect that had on my upbringing, on my interests, and on my development. And so I fell in love with reading and helping others to read and to have an interest in reading. And that's why I've been working towards that with my students.
Trini told me about an educational and inspiring experience her students had with a picture book.
One of the things that has happened is in the year 2019 in Chile, we had a social outburst. Colloquially, we call it estallido social, which was a moment in which a lot of the population had enough because our country is very unequal. And so there was like a climate of social change that we needed to address. And especially in my school, because my children were part of that group of people that because of the place they were born into, not by choice, not by merit, not by anything that was in their control or their parents' control. They were born into a place in which they had little access to culture, to a better lifestyle. And so I chose a book by Tan, an author that I admire because I believe that the picture books that he has created they are so beautiful in terms of their illustrations, but they are so profound in terms of the themes that they talk about. And so I chose the book La Cigarra, which I don't remember what the translation is, but it's a book about this little bug that lives every day working in a place where he is underappreciated, underpaid, ignored. And he, in this story, manifests as well how that the people that work around him, his bosses, know of the unfairness of his life, and still they choose to ignore it. And so we read the book, we talked about it, and they started, on their own volition, they started mentioning how this book reminded them of things that their parents had told them. It was a very big conversation because, like I said, it was such an important moment for our country that we were living, and that I felt that they were already processing because they were talking about it at home. And so this book was like a catalyst for that conversation. They started mentioning concepts like injustice. We talked a lot about the emotions that this book made them feel. So it was a divided moment in which some students mentioned that they were very angry because they felt it was so unfair that Cigarra had to live this life. But other students said that they were very sad because they felt the pain in which Cigarra, even in the language that Cigarra uses, we can see that she is someone that has migrated into a place because she does not speak Spanish properly. She's not using our grammar correctly. And so you know that this creature is trying to communicate in our language, but it's clearly not its first language. So they were talking about that as well, how people that have migrated to our country are even in a worse place because they are migrants. They thought that this book expressed their feeling of unfairness. But as well, we talked about the ending of this book that has like a very hopeful I believe like it leaves you with a little bit of hope that even though Cigarra was living this very unhappy life, he then eventually like leaves to a happier plane. And so my students mentioned that they believe that although this outburst had started in a very violent way, they believed that it would generate change. What we did in the end was that they wrote in a big paper. They first wrote what they thought that their country should look like. And so they talked about how public schools should have the same access to resources and materials as private schools. So they wrote down like the things that they would like to change in their country. And then later on, our whole school also had like a rally in which children wrote in little banners like things that they wanted to share and things that they wanted to say. And they showed it to other classmates that were older and from like high school that are in the same school. So they had like that space in which they said like, we want to tell the older people from the school what we think about this issue.
For Trini, it was important to choose a book that resonated with the lived experiences of her students.
I believe that reading and enjoying a book in whichever form can have a healing aspect. It can have a concept of reflecting on your own life, but also learning about other people's experiences, other realities, other fantasies.
I think one very key thing to remember is the metaphor that the American professor Rudine Sims Bishop has called for, which is giving children books in which they can see themselves, they can see others, and they can move forward in interacting with these others. So she calls it the metaphor of mirrors, windows, and doors. It's a very well-known metaphor now, but I think it is particularly important because unfortunately we have books that sometimes distort the reflections of readers through stereotypes or through having books where certain people are represented, other peoples are not, where certain characters have a voice, others remain silent or even invisible. It's important to really look carefully to analyze those books critically before they are presented to the children. I like to extend that metaphor by thinking of the door not only opening to let you outside, but also to let others in.
We have heard stories from 3 inspiring educators who are passionate about books and instilling a love of reading in children. We talked about the relevance of picture books, and you can find recommendations from our interviewees in the show notes. So I asked Evelyn what else educators could do to support children's experiences with these types of books.
Partly it's by also giving them some tools like vocabulary to talk about the images, to talk about those aesthetic elements that they see in the books, using words like perspective, for example, or zoom. I mean, most children know what zoom means, but helping them to identify those elements that illustrators use precisely to make meaning in picture books.
Finally, since Teachers' Voices is a global podcast that promotes equal access to learning, I asked Evelyn what we can learn from her important work with displaced children.
When you have nothing, when you have lost your home, when you have lost your material possessions, when there are no resources, and maybe even when you have lost the power to express yourself in the language of your new place, one of the things that you still have is your own language, your own voice, and the potential to tell your story.
You have just listened to another episode of Teachers' Voices. If you have enjoyed this episode, you would love the stories of Daniela working with storytellings and multilingualism in our 4th episode, and Deborah working with picture books and refugees in Lampedusa in our 2nd episode dedicated to teaching and learning under adverse conditions. If you would like to find out more about Evelyn's work or about the teacher stories we have just heard, head to the Bold website. We'd love to hear what you think about teachers' voices. Leave a comment on bold.expert. And don't forget to follow the series. There is a new episode coming every other week. And please share it with other people interested in learning and education. Thank you.
Lehrerstimmen.
Voces de profesores. Teachers' voices.